Donkey Kong has gone through several different iterations and gameplay styles over the years. The first games were single-screen platformers where you had to jump over stuff and get to the top. The games then became 2D platformers on the SNES with the country games and have stayed essentially in the platformer genre since then, with a few oddities thrown in here and there. The music in these games also went through a stage of trying to find themselves, which makes sense given that Donkey Kong is the awkward older brother that got completely outshined by his rockstar younger brother. So these next 2 weeks, we're going to take a look at the Donkey Kong games, from the original arcade game all the way up to Donkey Kong Country Returns, and see how the music has changed and who did the music that solidified Donkey Kong's style. First, the origins. Donkey Kong was Nintendo's breakout hit in 1981, where Jumpman had to save Lady from the titular character Donkey Kong. The music was created by Yukio Kaneoka, and is pretty simplistic, as most music in the early 80s was and had to be. Sounds for moving, jumping, and getting the hammer are staples of the stereotypical arcade noises. This game is super famous, but not many people know about the direct sequels. Donkey Kong Jr. had a shift in focus, and you played as Donkey Kong Jr. and had to save Donkey Kong, your father, from the evil Mario. The intro music for this one, instead of being Dragnet like the previous game, was Bach's famous Toccata and Fugue. The music in this game was just as simple as the first, which makes sense since Kaneoka did the music again. The interludes featured the Infernal Galop from Act 2, Scene 2 of Orpheus in the Underworld, an operetta by Jaques Offenbach. However, unless you happen to be a connoisseur of mid-19th century opera, you probably know it as the can-can music. Donkey Kong 2 was a Game & Watch game, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm sure it was fine, but finding good recordings of Game & Watch games is a bit difficult. Donkey Kong 3 in 1983 made Donkey Kong the villain again with more of a shooter vibe with a new protagonist, Stanley. Music in this game was done by Hirokazu Tanaka, and has a similar feel to the first two games, but with a little more layers than the others. Then, nothing. There were some remakes of the arcade games, but there weren't any real new Donkey Kong until 1994 with the release of Donkey Kong for the Game Boy. This game was really more of a reimagining of the original Donkey Kong, with the first few levels being identical before the game took on its own identity. The music was pretty much the same as the original arcade, but that's not really the game I want to talk about. This game came out in June of 1994, but the next Donkey Kong game came out in November of 1994. This set the path of all Donkey Kong games for the future and really changed the way Nintendo approached games from then until today. And of course, the music is absolutely amazing. That game is, of course, Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country was created by Rare and, at the time, small British developer. Nintendo liked their work and approached them to create a new Donkey Kong game, and the result was Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Jr. had toyed with the idea of a more jungle theme, but Donkey Kong Country truly embraced it. The settings, the enemies, the characters, and of course the music. The composer for the first three Donkey Kong Country games was David Wise. Wise enjoys atmospheric music and percussion, which translates amazingly well to a jungle setting. The music in these games varies between gentle and ambient, to intense and fast-paced, to hip-hop-ish. Hip-hop themes tend to happen a lot in Donkey Kong games from here on out. But of course, the biggest and most famous theme from this game is the DK Island Swing. This piece seems to be based very strongly on Sing Sing Sing, a jazz standard from the 40s by Benny Goodman. The percussion interlude is very similar to Sing Sing Sing, but then the song takes on a more subtle tone. Overall, this piece is great and has become the song most associated with the Donkey Kong games. Donkey Kong Country 2 improved on a lot of things from the first game, but the music remained the same, that is to say, amazing. Overall, it is more of a seafaring theme, which makes sense given the setting and the story of the game. Also, it's worth pointing out that the beginning of Bayou Boogie sounds exactly the same as In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. The game also has some great jungly percussion-heavy pieces, and calm, quiet pieces. And the DK Island Swing returns as Token Tango, the bonus level music. Donkey Kong Country 3 features more electronic and industrial sounding music for the actual levels, with jazz and blues in the special locations. It features the intro of DK Swing as the Save Cave music. And there's also the Game Boy Donkey Kong Land games. These feature music that was, like the games themselves, pared down versions of the SNES game that came out the year before. DK Island Swing became Jungle Jaunt. The next two games had literally the same music, no name changes or anything, just Game Boy friendly versions. David Wise did the first game, Grant Kirkhope did the second, and Evelyn Fisher did the third. Fisher also helped compose for all three country games, especially Donkey Kong Country 3, so her doing the Game Boy renditions makes sense. Next is Diddy Kong Racing and Donkey Kong 64, but there's a lot of information for those, so I'm going to save that for next week. Until then, listen well.